No. Hello, everyone. Only 90 minutes left until you can formally tap out. So thank you very much for making it here at the end of the week and the end of the day. We have a really exciting session in front of us where we're learning from some really experienced people around us. And it's a practical session too, with hopefully some things that we can all take away to our own projects, portfolios and programs. As our climate, my name is Sareen Ashdown, by the way, and I'm fortunately moderating this session. And I work for Arup as a civil engineer in flood resilience. As our climate is changing, our communities, environments and economies are facing increasing threats due to flooding. We arguably need to adapt at local, regional, national and international scales. Today, we will explore 4 innovative approaches, well, international, national, and regional and local approaches to enabling flood resilience and adaptation that are effective across various scales. But for a 20-minute panel discussion. You're in luck, as I am now going to introduce you to Dr. Robert Bradburn, our keynote speaker, and one of the most engaging speakers I've seen this week. So, and that's no pressure on you, Dr. Robert Bradburn. So, Dr. Robert Bradburn is the Chief Scientist, Director of Chief Scientist Group, and Head of the Environment Agency's Science Profession. He leads an interdisciplinary team of over 200 scientists and other specialists supporting all aspects of science across the Environment Agency and has over 23 years of experience. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you for such a kind introduction, and thank you everyone for making it to this point in the week. And I know you've just had lunch, so my part here is as a warm-up act to the real meat of this afternoon. So we're going to try and get you woken up to that. So I just want to set a bit of the scene for you around some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm also going to reflect on some of the things that I'm hoping, like me, you've learned from some of the sessions this week. The first thing really is all about collaboration and the power of working with each other. That's what this afternoon's all about. Thinking about this issue from a number of different angles. Everyone has something to learn by listening to how other people are dealing with this. Because climate change, I'm afraid, as we all know, is happening. And the first thing that I've learnt this week is that climate adaptation, therefore, is also not something that needs to happen, but is something that is happening around the world in different places, by different groups, in their own different ways. So the UK is certainly not immune. This is a lovely map from my friends at the Met Office of the rainfall a couple of autumns ago. The UK gets its rain from the Atlantic. The Atlantic is on that side. Not in autumn 2023, it didn't. It had buckets of rain coming down the east side, and then just when we thought that was over, we had a storm rattle along the south coast. Look at the poor Isle of Wight, that tiny little dot at the bottom, covered in 200% of its usual rainfall. So it's not only as climate changes that we get more rain, necessarily, but we get rain where we expect it the least. And we get rain at different times of the year from when we expect it. So when we're thinking about flooding and resilience, it isn't just resilience to an average amount of rainfall. It's resilience to an ever more changing set of rainfall patterns. And that makes us have to think differently about what we think resilience is. So, yes, we need to plan carefully. We know that early adaptation saves lives and it saves money, and that every pound we invest today will be a great return for communities around the world later. We currently protect in England, in my constituency, around 2.3 million properties. We need, if our models are correct, to be going over double that number as the number that are going to be falling into risk categories as the climate changes. The fantastic news is that we have an approach in the Environment Agency which thinks about resilience and thinks about flooding in three different ways. And the first way, protecting people from flooding, is an important part of that. And the government's recognised that, and it's put more money into protecting people from flooding than it ever has before. That is fantastic news. We will protect, if everything goes to plan, about 840,000 more homes over the next few years. That is brilliant news. It's brilliant news for the individuals concerned. It's brilliant news for the economy in the local area. It isn't everyone. And so what we also have to think about when we're thinking about resilience is what we can do for those people who are still at risk. We cannot remove all risk. We can reduce it to a 1 in 75 year return, a 1 in 200 year return. We cannot remove that risk. So we also need to help those communities prepare, help them have properties which are well prepared in case they do get water ingress, help them by putting good warning systems in place. We have a text alert system in England. If you're in a flood area, you can get a ping. We can tell you when there is possible danger near. And we are trying to get as many people signed up to that as possible. I heard a dreadful story a few years ago about one particular flood incident where we had the army involved. We had the army knocking on people's doors saying, "Get out of your property, you are at risk." And people were saying, "Really? But I've got this to do." And you think, if the army is knocking on your door and saying, "Get out of your property, you are at risk," what more can we do? But we have to realise we work with people whose lives are in those houses, and actually we've got to think about that social science element of how we support people. So protection, resilience, and then adaptation. And I think some of the things we're going to hear about today are some really exciting projects where we move beyond the protection space into how do we make the system work differently so that there is less likelihood of having those very extreme events. And that's where the science, to my mind, gets really, really exciting, because it makes us think about the way that these systems operate in very different ways. It makes us think about engineering in different ways. One of the lovely quotes I heard just this morning was, we've spent as many years, and there's probably quite a lot of engineers in the room, so I'm going to have to be quite careful. We've spent many years with the engineers trying to separate water from the environment, put it in pipes, put it in tunnels. Now we're going to have to think about putting that water back in the environment, and that's very relevant for flooding as well as water supply. But to do this, we are going to have a really, really good evidence base. That evidence base is going to have to work at a second to minute level. When we are warning people of the dangers, they are going to have to get that warning very, very quickly. But it's going to have to work at a decadal level. If we are growing floodplain forests, we are going to have to watch that change over the course of a number of decades. So it's got to work across time. And above me, you can see it's also got to work across spatial scales. Whether that be flood maps, which are ever-changing and adapting and working out how the climate's going to change in terms of risk across a whole area, to individual responses of, in this case, a nature-based solution. So we need that monitoring, we need that data, and then that brings us on to what we're going to hear about this afternoon, which is taking action at a range of scales. I think we are going to hear this afternoon that there is no one-size-fits-all. No one country is the same, no one scale is the same, no one flooding issue is the same. So what we're going to see, I think, this afternoon is examples of really innovative, adaptive work in different places, people trying things that are new. And that's why an opportunity like this is so important, because if we're trying things that are new, we must talk to each other about what works and, importantly, what doesn't work, so that we can avoid the mistakes that others have made, that we can learn from each other, and we can move this on quickly, because we do need to move that on quickly. I hope we're also going to hear about the importance of collaboration, the importance of people in all of this. We have to work with real people. There is no point in preventing flooding if people are not at the heart of that. So how do we do that? How do we do that inclusively when people want different things, when we have stakeholders across great big basins who all want different things with that water? So it'll be really interesting to hear about that. So I just finish by saying, to my view, generating resilience, this magical word, is not simply a technical challenge. And if we approach it as a simply technical challenge, I feel we will not get the resilience that we are looking for. We need to approach it as a collaborative challenge, working in real places with real people, balancing, finding a new equilibrium between nature and people in these systems, and working out how to deal with the inevitable uncertainty that climate change is going to bring us. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. We've got a fantastic group of speakers, and I'm going to pass over now to Serena to lead us through the rest. Seamless. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rob. So let's now zoom out to the international scale, and I will introduce you to Dr. Benedikt Kruger, an associate at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. He is responsible for delivering green city action plans and conducting climate assessments for infrastructure projects. An environmental engineer by training, he previously worked in environmental consulting and completed a PhD in wastewater management. Over to Ben.
Good afternoon, everyone, and first of all, thanks a lot for having me. I think this is okay. Okay, let me try this. Yes, that works. So, first of all, the way I'm going to approach this is I'll tell you a bit about the work that we do on urban infrastructure, and especially our work on EBRD Green Cities. And that will then lead me to one of our example projects that we are currently financing in Moldova on flood management. So it's more a story about how we came to finance a flood management project that blends grey, blue and green approaches. So let me tell you about our program, EBRD Green Cities. It's basically our flagship program for municipal infrastructure, for financing infrastructure, and some headline figures. So by now, we have more than 50 cities in the network. We have financed very recently, more than 100 projects. And if you count that sort of collective investment just from us, from the EBRD, under the Green Cities framework, then that comes to over 3 billion over the past 8 years. If you then take the total budgets we've earmarked for the program, in addition to the donor money that we've mobilized as part of this, then that number goes up to 7 billion. So I think these numbers sort of speak for themselves, why it's our flagship program when it comes to urban finance. In terms of geographic reach, it basically mirrors our countries of operation, so as far east as Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, as far west as Morocco, where we have, for example, Agadir, who recently completed its GCAP. And I had a look at the map to see who's closest to Stockholm, and I think that would be Vilnius, who also adopted their Green City Action Plan very recently. So the question is, what is the Green Cities program and what does it have to do with flooding? And the main thing about this program and what it makes it sort of more unique compared to many other action plans or strategy, which is that investment and policy work always goes hand in hand. So our policy work, the development of the Green City Action Plan, can only happen if we have assigned trigger investment. So that's sort of the commitment we need from the city we're working with to ensure that they have skin in the game, that they're willing to do something. And I was reminded of this in a session earlier today, the session with Copenhagen and Stockholm, if any one of you listened in on that this morning, where the colleague from Stockholm was saying, like, one of the first things that he looks for is having an active stakeholder that is willing to invest. And that's also our starting point, and this is sort of how we ensure this trigger investment. So this process, the way it works is once we have the trigger project signed, then we go into sort of a one-year journey of developing a Green City Action Plan. It has two stages, the baselining stage and the action planning stage, and then we tilt sort of quite quickly into the implementation. And where does flooding come in? Well, the Green City Action Plans are integrated, holistic, so they go across all the municipal sectors, water management, waste management, transport, and so forth, cross-cutting as well, so resilience, inclusion, digital. And what we're seeing that in many of our cities, as you can imagine, flood risk gets flagged as one of the key environmental challenges. And this was also the case for our Green City Action Plan in Chisinau, so the capital of Moldova. Now, they were one of the earlier cities in the program. They adopted their Green City Action Plan in 2020. So another key term here, adopted. Green City Action Plans are sort of city-owned documents that are adopted by the governing body, so the city council in this case. And they have since actually invested into 5 projects under this framework, at least with us. And one of the key environmental challenges they had was flooding. And as a result of that, they formulated the GCAP action on flood management, which is integrated flood water management and piloting of nature-based solutions to improve climate resilience, prevent flood damage, and rehabilitate the River Big. So, and I mentioned they signed 5 projects, and one of these projects signed 2 years ago, and that was the River Big Rehabilitation and Flood Protection Project. And this is the one I want to highlight for us now. This is what the River Big looks like in the city center. So I'm hoping in a few years' time I can show you the exactly. Yeah, this is what it looks like right now. And this is sort of more about the journey, how we ended up financing this project. So I hope in a few years' time I can come back and show you the pictures of how this project looks, or how the sort of especially that section within the city looks like today. So the story is, I think, a situation that many of us are familiar with. If we have high river flows combined with heavy rainfall events, we have excess stormwater, then we always end up with quite severe flooding in the city center. And this is a scenario which, as you sort of highlighted before, a scenario that is not expected to improve under climate change scenarios, it's expected to worsen. So the approach was to blend a solution where we rehabilitate the stretch of the river, about 6 kilometers. We also add in nature-based solutions for flood management within the city, so tree pits and rain gardens, but then also blend in the grey, so improving and rehabilitating the drainage system in the city, as sort of a blended solution. The benefits, obvious: avoided damage, avoided disruption. This was used, quantified to make the case for the economic reasoning, and then we have other co-benefits: public realm along the river, things like biodiversity co-benefits. So I don't have that much more time, otherwise I would have told you, because I'm speaking on behalf of a bank, about all of our different financing products we have to finance products like this, but I'll focus on the key highlights, which is What allowed us to finance a project like this, it was upstream engagement, having the bank at the table very early on in the process, which is why we run these Green City action plans. We had flexibility on the financing, because one thing I didn't mention here is that it was a blended climate finance solution with 4 million investment grant from the GCF. We seeded the ideas early. Whenever you're in a situation where you're doing a feasibility study and you only have 3 to 6 months and you want to go hard on nature-based solutions, that's usually too late. If you have that upstream engagement a few years beforehand, seeding these ideas, then we can come up with better projects further down the line. So if you're interested in learning more about our program and what we can do, especially also on flooding, then please get in touch. Sorry if I'm a bit over time. This is a video of the project, so if you want to scan that, you can have a look for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. I remember Ben saying yesterday, actually, a really good description of what multilateral banks do, and it's being fast followers of what others are doing, but the best practice delivered by other actors in the sector, and recognising the high stakes that a lot of developing countries have. So I will now hand over, in a good segue, to Mark Fletcher, who will share the international perspective from the private sector and public partnering together. Dr. Mark Fletcher has spent over 20 years promoting the principles of sustainable development and sustainable water management. He is the global water leader at Arup and is responsible for all water and flood risk related business activity, and has advised regional, national and transnational levels. Thanks.
So I'm now going to redefine what a fast follower truly is, because I'm going to try and cover a £6 billion flood programme in 7 minutes. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. So back in November, I visited Lima, the Rimac and Trujillo in Peru, and I just want to share with you a sort of national flood adaptation programme that we're involved in, what I would describe as a sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for large basin-scale adaptation. I think this will click on. Okay, so back in 2017, a significant El Niño impacted Peru. 113 people were killed, 360 injured, 1.1 million people affected, 115,000 homes destroyed, 178,000 homeless, 260 medical centres impacted, and 2,500 kilometres of roads destroyed, with about $3.5 billion of damage. So it's quite large scale, and it was quite significant. The global competition was held with a number of governments because of the scale of response required for a government-to-government response. And the UK government was successful. And as a result, we've been working for the last 5 years, basically to build capacity within the Peruvian government. And some of those key factors in project delivery, it's about putting sort of carbon reduction and sustainability at the forefront, seeing how we could use this to catalyse change within the country, the way in which large-scale interventions and adaptations procured, and actually how it's run within the country, putting communities right at the heart of everything that's happening. Seeking technical excellence and what I'd say is global good practice, but at the same time increasing economic prosperity. We've currently got about 50 people in Peru and about 100 people supporting from US, Spain, UK and China, but at times that team's been about 3 times that size. Okay, so in simple terms, because time's short, it's about 74 schools have been replaced, 15 hospitals and health centres, it's 17 river basins, it's 7 cities, so 7 city drainage projects, and a national early warning system. So no mean feat, really, considering that it was procured through COVID and a lot of the work initially was done remotely. And It's innovation in terms of thinking about, in the upper basin, how can we work within the catchment, reforest our forest, use dams, try and reduce the amount of water that's going to flow downstream, how we might use terracing and attenuation dikes to try and minimise the risk of landslides, look at how we manage flow and sediments in the basin. There's construction of some flood defences to improving urban drainage systems. The scale is huge. And in terms of natural infrastructure, there's a sort of, what's the opportunity to restore native vegetation, think about soil conservation, thinking about recovery of areas of ecosystem degradation. But part of what we're trying to do is we're reducing mass movement. If I was to describe a flood, if the boulders within it were between 3 and 4 metres, it gives you a sense of the debris flow, that if you get caught within that, it's not like, do I drown? It's more like, does it take out my town? So it's really, I've never seen anything like it. And it's really quite dramatic when you see the energy involved in that sort of situation. So just to give you a sort of scale, our current programme is looking across around 50,000 hectares. We've got about 20,000 hectares of reforestation, 56 million native plants and trees. I love it when people talk about nature-based solutions, and it's like a bit of a development. So it's 56 million native plants and trees, and about 220,000 tonnes of carbon sequestration, all done within a framework to track progress against the UN SDGs. So I think it's been ambitious, but I think I'm very proud that we've been involved in it as part of that consortium. I'll just mention Mace, Gleeds, HR Wallingford, Fathom. They're some of the partners in there. It's really important that they get a shout. So this is a country where within 200 kilometres you can go from sea level to 5,000 metres. There's a very short window of time to warn people, but a robust and trusted early warning system is the key to saving lives. And it was really important that we established a sort of common vision, mission and values for everybody at the start of the projects, and they've been the guiding light. So it's 17 river basins, it's 2 ravines. It'll be one of probably the most advanced early warning system in the world. So the first component is a new risks and hazards system. We then have a new monitoring system as the second component, and that includes a forecasting and a nowcasting system to allow 2 to 6 hour advanced alerts. New sirens for the alert system to disseminate the risks. Think a little bit more like avalanche sirens, that sort of things that we can mobilise quickly. And dramatically improving response capacity, thinking about training, capacity building, community education, drills, evacuation signage, when you're trying to deal with 14 million people to benefit from an early warning system. So I think that's quite ambitious. And the benefits of the government-to-government agreement: fast, efficient, transparent procurement. It's in line with international standards. Best practice incorporated on sustainable and resilient design. Safe, responsible, flexible and collaborative construction. But the important thing about this is about building capacity for the country. So basically our challenge is to extract ourselves out and leave Peru in a much better way to provide large-scale adaptation going forwards. And that includes improving what's happening in the supply chain. And there's an element of the sort of the impact that we want to have on the country, not just knowledge transfer or systemic change or changing the way we might think about problems, but in a country where there's a fixation on transparency of public procurement. This has been highlighted as the best performing government agency now in the whole of Peru, with a 98% execution rate. So I think it's something we're all very proud of. It's unprecedented pace and transparency, and new design standards. But I think it also demonstrates the sort of national or international agility we might have to all start to embrace as we're facing ever-increasing extremes and frequent extremes. So, gracias, I've just covered 6 billion in 7 minutes, hopefully, something like. And I hope you got a bit of a story from it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. And this, as you saw, there are standards and tools that are being developed, and it means that this is an approach that can be replicated. So I might ask Mark a little bit more about that later. I'll now hand over to Rose, who is online and will talk about the national scale. Rose Jenkinson is a principal consultant at Arup and a strategic thinker with extensive experience providing strategic services across the water and environment sector. Thanks, Rose. Let me know when you want me to click.
Amazing. Thanks so much for the introduction, Serena. So today I'm going to give you a taste of our project, which was working with the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales and developing a vision for a flood resilient future. If you want to go on to the next slide, Serena. So across Wales, many communities and natural systems are at risk of flooding from rivers, the sea and surface water. And as our climate continues to change, we can expect those risks to increase with more frequent and severe floods, rising sea levels and faster rates of erosion of the coastline. So the case for change is compelling and urgent. And while Welsh Government have set a national FCRM strategy, which identifies a national approach for how we can manage flood risk for the next 10 years, ourselves and NICU identified a gap in what a long-term approach for enabling flood resilience at a nationwide level could look like. And recognising that the current climate crisis and accompanying narratives can often lead individuals, communities and organisations and governments feeling stuck, overwhelmed and unable to act, our project looked to consider how we might shift the narrative from one of fear and uncertainty to one of hope and possibility through the development of an inspiring vision for change. And the intention of our work was to really understand how we could work together to develop flood resilience, along with adapting to future changes, ensuring that different components and contributors can work towards a common goal. Next slide, please. So in response, our project pioneered an inclusive, imaginative approach to resilience planning, drawing on our technical expertise in flood resilience and closely working with our Arup Global Foresight team. We combine technical concepts with futures thinking, participatory world building and innovative storytelling to shape a collective vision for Wales. And through a series of world building workshops, we engaged with over 100 diverse Wales-based stakeholders, and this included flood risk management professionals, political representatives, community groups and infrastructure providers and environmental organisations. And through these workshops, we co-created and explored possible futures for Wales. And based on the feedback from the participants, we were able to build a rich story of the future. And from these emerging principles, themes and actions were developed to form the final vision for 2050. And ensuring all voices were included and that our final output reflected real life experiences. And I'll take you very briefly through our approach to give you a bit of a taste of how we approach developing the vision, and hopefully will inspire thinking to the projects that you're working on and delivering internationally. So in the first instance, we set the context of the vision, and to frame the participatory workshops, we identified a number of key trends and drivers and uncertainties that might influence the future trajectory of Wales regarding resilience and flood and adaptation to climate change. And we framed these within a short video that presented the challenges ahead, but then asked participants to imagine what if things were different. And this formed a series of provocations about hopeful future, alternative futures, which challenged individuals to think differently and beyond our current constraints. Next slide, please. So then within the participatory workshops and following that introductory scene setting, we set out 4 scenarios of the future to help participants imagine a range of different alternative futures, each with different actors across the flood risk management system, taking different roles and having varying levels of understanding of the challenges faced. And these scenarios were then developed by the workshop participants. So we identified and set out a series of questions that helped to explore and build pictures of what these futures could look like. In doing so, considering how flood resilience could be enabled across each, and through exploring those, identifying both benefits and trade-offs of different future scenarios. For example, one of the scenarios, story 2, that looked at communities that are proactive in decision making, empowered and more resilient in the face of flooding. And this, one of the benefits was the fact that there was active and collaborative communities that were able to address challenges posed by flooding. However, there was a recognition that decisions can be made slower in more centralized format. And then if you move to the next slide, within each of these 4 futures, we used 8 personas with diverse experience of flood risk, including a local resident, a farmer, business owner, and a river. And these represented voices that might not be present in the room to ensure diverse or marginalised perspectives were considered across each of these different futures. And notably, as I mentioned, one of the future personas was a river, which acted as a key voice to prompt reflection on nature as a stakeholder. And we asked workshop participants to embody these personas and consider from their perspectives the impacts and their needs in each scenario of the future to ensure that all perspectives were considered when we're exploring what the benefits and opportunities are with each of these different futures. And then if you go on to the next slide, using all of the feedback collated from the workshops, we were able to start deconstructing what each future could look like and the detail of what life would look like and feel like, what new organisations could emerge and what challenges and opportunities could be formed to support each future narrative. And based on these futures and the conversations that we had, we worked with Prif B, who also attended the workshops as well, who's a Wales-based creative, and she worked to produce a painting that really encapsulates some of the conversations and that were had as part of the workshop and forms the vision itself. And our intention was to work with the arts sector to produce a piece of work or artifact that would provoke conversations with those outside of the technical flood resilience sector. And Prif drew inspiration from the workshop feedback and her own sense of what the vision for flood resilient Wales could look like. She was particularly inspired by the river persona used in the workshop, and she captured it as an essence through the essence of the Welsh landscape. And the painting represents water and landscape in harmony with people, which really encapsulates the conversations and the vision that we present as part of this project. And the artwork will be permanently displayed in the Transport for Wales offices, hopefully promoting future conversations around what a resilient Wales could look like. And the next slide just briefly illustrates some of the future personas developed as one of the future scenarios from the perspective of a potential future farmer or the river in one of our stories where we look at, or one of the future scenarios where we look at the government taking the lead in a flood resilient response. And then on the next slide, we presents an overarching summary of the vision with the key principles. So to form this, we use the opportunities which emerge from the 4 future scenarios, and we describe what a hopeful and transformative vision for the future could look like. And we use this to form a series of principles that intend to guide decision makers and policy makers towards the desired future. And our outputs are captured in an open access website, which hosts the project outputs and our workshop materials so that others can replicate the approach and continue conversations around resilience and adaptation. And our resulting vision for Wales sets a pathway for a society to work collectively and together alongside with nature to build flood resilience. And to support Wales towards moving towards this vision, we propose near and long-term radical and transformative recommendations for actions to achieve these ambitions. And NICU then used these to form a series of recommendations to Welsh Government that will intend to influence future policy and decision-making around flood resilience and climate adaptation in Wales. So in summary, by integrating and some reflections that I've particularly taken from this project are that by integrating flood risk management insights with design and foresight methodologies, we were really able to translate complex flood risk data and principles and future trends into accessible narratives that enabled stakeholders, regardless of their technical background and expertise, to really meaningfully engage in shaping a resilient future. And I think our project really helps to demonstrate how creative approaches can make scientific insights more engaging and actionable. And ultimately, our vision for a future Wales presents a hopeful and unifying narrative of working collectively alongside nature. And it recognises that when it comes to how we manage more water and the changing climate in the future, we must all be in it together, and that we must all work alongside, not against nature. And hopefully our work plays a role in Wales not only being prepared for future challenges, but also to be a global leader in adaptive, community-driven climate action.
Thank you very much, Rose. Many of us were very fortunate to take part in the Foresight session earlier this week, where we got to run through one of the methodology. So, yeah, take a look. Next, we've got Kat and John. John Morgan, they're both looking at the regional scale. John Morgan is a project manager within the Flood and Coastal Risk Management Directorate of the Environment Agency. He delivers strategy and construction projects that benefit communities and the environment. Louise Ellis, oh, no, it's not Kat, it's Louise. Louise Ellis is a, associate director and leads Arup's water team and strategic water services team. Thank you very much. Thanks. Oh, click.
Brilliant. Thank you, Serena. And hello, everyone. I hope you've all had a fantastic week. The agenda looks fantastic. Can we see my first slide? Fantastic, perfect. So the River Severn is the UK's longest river. It supports 6 million people and contributes £7 billion annually to national food production. Yet it faces severe fluvial flooding that disrupts communities and economies increasingly frequently. Our project, Severn 2100 Plus, is part of DEFRA's Flood Resilience Innovation Programme, which is piloting approaches that build national adaptation across 4 major catchments in England. For the Severn 2100 Plus, we brought together the expertise and local knowledge of the Environment Agency, Arup, Jacobs, and the River Severn Partnership to develop adaptation planning and flood resilience strategies. Next slide, please. The Severn region has a long history of flooding, but today's risks are growing due to climate change, growing population, and ageing infrastructure, putting 47,000 properties at high risk currently. Adaptation planning is an enabler for a longer-term, holistic approach to flood risk management that enables catchment-wide planning that meets the scale and complexity of the challenge we face. Crucially, bringing together local partners, we hope to enable the scale of action that's required while unlocking benefits, wider benefits for communities and the environment. So our response has had to be adaptive, strategic, sustainable, and collaborative. And we've worked with our partners, focusing in 2 subcatchments in the region, the Upper Severn and the Warwickshire Avon, using the contrasting aspects of those catchments, the Upper Severn being very rural, the Warwickshire Avon being more developed, and varying amounts of data that we have in those 2 catchments to build as much learning as we can that we can feed back to the area teams within the Environment Agency, national, and to our partners. Next slide, please. So we've taken an approach which builds upon the British Standard 8631 adaptation to climate change. And we've developed our own personal framework, if you like, for fluvial adaptation planning. And it looks a bit like this. we went clockwise around this and started at the context and ambition stage, working with our partners to really firm up what we were aiming for, and then stepping through the whole process with them. Next slide, please. So to embed this regional place-based approach, we work closely with the River Severn Partnership, which is an award-winning collective of over 20 regional stakeholders spanning England and Wales, which includes local authorities, charities, universities, and others, all interested in how we better manage flooding in the region. And our partners fed into our approach at every stage. Next slide, please. Thank you. And our first stage was to set the context and ambition, and we agreed a theory of change with our partners, building on the River Severn Partnership's vision for the catchment to make the Severn Britain's most vibrant, resilient and sustainable river network. And we supported this with work with citizens panels involving the public from across the region. And we used the core themes of the River Severn Partnership as our foundation throughout the project and kept referring back to them. Thank you. I'll hand over to Louise now, who's got the next slide.
Thank you very much. So we began by identifying priority trends that the River Severn catchment faced out of a long list of future uncertainties. These included growth and climate change. And these informed scenarios to help us consider what could change in the future to impact the risks and opportunities at play. Working with local experts across those two focus areas, we used the scenarios to identify flood risk hotspots as well as opportunity areas. And in the diagram on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the overlay of where we see kind of increasing development and growth with the dark blue areas which show the additional flooding that you'll see under the RCP 8.5 in 2100. To respond to these future risks and opportunities, we developed and refined a long list of physical and non-physical adaptation actions with the River Severn Partnership. We categorised these adaptation actions into broad portfolios, working across natural processes or nature-based solutions, grey solutions, asset management, and enablers like behavioural and policy enablers. To assess the feasibility and performance of each of the portfolios, we trialled a data-driven approach in one of the sub-catchments, drawing on extensive analysis and modelling, versus an expert-driven approach in another catchment, which was a little bit more data scarce. And there we appraised each option using a multi-capitals benefit toolkit, our sustainability objectives from our sustainability appraisal approach, and the ability of the particular adaptation action to address peak flow uplifts due to climate change. We developed scorecards for each of the adaptation actions and used those as a tool to collaborate with the River Severn Partnership through a collaborative pathways building workshop. Through the pathways building workshop, with the River Severn Partnership, we sequenced those portfolio of adaptation actions into strategic scale adaptation pathways in the two focus areas. We looked at it through three different lenses: wider benefits, a precautionary approach, and a cost-constrained approach. And that allowed us to identify what was common across those three approaches, and therefore what were the low regrets adaptation actions. The pathways were then stress tested against the future growth and climate scenarios. And then we worked kind of after that to refine those workshop outputs in collaboration with local experts to develop the emerging adaptive pathways. This is the adaptive pathway for the Upper Severn focus area. This is the pathway particularly for the high climate change future, RCP 8.5. And just to kind of orientate you around the diagram, you read the diagram from the top down to determine the sequencing of portfolios, and from the left to the right to give an indication of the delivery time. Dependencies across the portfolios are identified by grey arrows, and then the solid nodes are enablers, which have to take place essentially in order to allow the adaptation action or portfolio that happens afterwards to happen. So things like changes in planning policy that may be required. Based on the River Severn Partnership vision and the work we did looking at what was common across the three scenarios, we've prioritised nature-based solutions in the short term, followed by harder engineered defences, and eventually, where needed, localised managed realignment. We also stress-tested these pathways under a lower climate change future. And under this lower climate change future, we found that some of the portfolios may be able to be delayed by up to 40 years under RCP 4.5. So this really demonstrates the value of taking an adaptive pathways approach, meaning that in some instances, we may be able to both plan for potential large-scale action that we may be able to take, but be able to plan now, but have the agility to act in the future. We also developed a monitoring and evaluation framework to monitor the performance of both the adaptation actions and pathways, but also the changes that might occur in the external environment. The River Severn Partnership was really heavily involved in identifying the long list of indicators of change. We then shortlisted those into a robust framework that can inform decisions on when and how to act. Finally, we worked really collaboratively with the Environment Agency to explore how we unlock the key enabling conditions for an adaptive approach and for an adaptation pathways approach, noting that that would need to change some of the governance and financing and data and information around the current approach to flood risk management. That includes things like having access to relevant data and information to make decisions about the monitoring and evaluation framework, effective governance structures to look at the snapshots in time as you move through the pathways and make decisions about which pathway you need to be on, have meaningful stakeholder engagement about those decisions, as well as adequate financial resources to commit to a pathway. Adaptive pathways are a significant departure from business as usual processes, and they will shift us from a localised predict and act approach to a much more strategic catchment-wide monitor and adapt approach. However, the first 5 years of the adaptation pathways will feed directly into the programme of work that the Environment Agency could take, driving things like local capital schemes as well as enabling activities. So, in conclusion, our agile and iterative sprint approach that we took, kind of moving around that wheel, enabled us to really simplify quite a complex problem of how to develop adaptation pathways and make rapid progress towards their development. Piloting our approach in the 2 subcatchments enabled us to move from a theoretical to a practical application and crucially trial this approach in a relatively data-rich subcatchment and a data-scarce subcatchment. The key to the success of this programme was the regional collaboration with the River Severn Partnership. That enabled us to develop pathways that were potentially co-owned with other actors in the sector. And so that was really important, and an important thing that we kind of got from that was the need to set that governance up early ahead of moving into the development of the adaptation pathways. We had tailored engagement with partners to build buy-in, support, and also capacity for adaptation. So as part of the River Severn Partnership workshops, we also had a portion of the day which was about people sharing what they were doing on adaptation. So representatives from local authorities, from ENGOs sharing their approach to adaptive planning within their organisations. And finally, we applied a multi-benefit approach, a 6 capitals integrated reporting model. And that really allowed us to align to the River Severn vision and to maximise the wider benefits and opportunities for partnership funding. We also took an approach where we looked at potential at the index of multiple deprivations as part of that benefits analysis to ensure that we reflected vulnerability in the way that we were making decisions. Thank you very much, everybody.
So I'll come back to you. Thank you very much, Louise and John. I mean, you both communicated a really complex topic around managing risk in a very different way, very concisely and clearly. Thank you. We'll now hand over to Nick and Kat, who will be discussing the local scale. Nick Watson is a chartered civil engineer with over 10 years of experience working in infrastructure design and flood risk management. Nick currently leads the flooding and coastal erosion risk management team at Northumberland County Council. Kat Wallace is a chartered civil engineer at Arup with experience of as a design manager role on flood and coastal erosion management projects, as well as being a delivery manager for digital resilience innovation projects. Thanks both. Let me know where you want to click next.
Thank you very much, Serena, and good afternoon, everybody. So today we'll be talking you through how we're improving flood resilience in Northumberland with the use of flood AI. So next slide, please. So for a bit of background, DEFRA is the UK government body with an overview of flood risk management. And it's acknowledged that we can't prevent all flooding. And so it's really important to start focusing more and more on resilience. And with a view to that, DEFRA funded the Flooding and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, looking at projects, researching how we can improve resilience across society. And that includes flood AI. So through flood AI, we're piloting a flood warning service using artificial intelligence and machine learning to provide a flood warning to 6 pilot communities across Northumberland that are currently isolated from the existing flood warning services. Our vision statement there sums it up very nicely. The key bits there are that we're looking to provide a really specific and timely warning to communities that currently aren't served, which is particularly the mid-sized and very fast responding catchments. Next slide, please. So just to talk through the challenge and emphasise really the need for flood warnings. Flood warnings are a really important part of providing resilience. It acknowledges that flooding can't be stopped. It is going to happen, unfortunately, but the flood warning gives communities the best chance of being able to reduce the damage it causes and protect properties, protect people. And that's the communities themselves, as well as the organisations that are responsible for responding. So in England, there's over 300,000 properties that are at risk of flooding from rivers, the sea, bordering watercourses, that don't actually receive or aren't able to receive a flood warning at the minute. It particularly affects rural communities where you don't have large concentrations of properties, and in particular flashy catchments where the current technological issues mean it's really difficult to actually be able to provide flood warnings in the time that's needed in these very, very fast responding catchments, as we have in Northumberland and around the country. So essentially this all leads responders and the communities relying on generalised warnings, not really getting the specifics, which leads to a lot of uncertainty. There's all the associated mental health impacts of that, lack of trust in the warnings that are received when they're not specific to their community, which ultimately all leaves the responders and the communities in a position of being very vulnerable and unable to effectively prepare when flooding occurs. And I'll now hand over to Kat to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the project.
Thanks, Nick. So we're talking about enabling flood resilience through providing a flood warning. Let's break that down a little bit further. So from our community consultation events, resilience for them is all about being aware of when and where they're going to flood and having the information to know what to do about it to mitigate the worst effects. This is where flood warning comes in. Having a flood warning doesn't in itself make the community resilient. Instead, it's an enabler for the resilience action people can then take. We found there's 3 components of a flood warning service that enable people to take action. Firstly is perhaps the most obvious. It's the analytics and performance behind the forecasting. A flood warning is no good if it can't provide accurate, specific, and timely information about when and where you're going to flood. Secondly, the user needs to understand that information and what they should be doing about it. Do they need to do anything? If so, what action should they take to mitigate the worst of the impacts? And finally, is the least tangible, user trust. This is crucially important, as even with the other two components, people don't act unless they trust what they're being told to do. Next slide, please. So what is the resilience action we're trying to enable? Through our early consultation process, we set out ideal timeframes and requirements of a flood warning service such that people have the right information at the right time in order to undertake the right actions to mitigate the worst of the impacts. This figure shows a hydrograph in a lead up to a flood event, which we've then mapped the decision-making processes and follow-up actions to. The response starts 2 to 3 days out, with authorities starting to plan their response, understanding who's on duty, making sure they're aware of what might be incoming and what resources are available. We've identified our most critical timeframe as the 8-hour mark, as this is where people start to implement their action plans, whether that's driving home from work to start moving furniture upstairs and put sandbags out to divert the water, or moving their cars out of the way of the flood damages. In the worst case, this is them packing the essentials before evacuating. To adequately do all of this, 8 hours of notice is required. Next slide, please. However, 8 hours of lead time presents a significant challenge in the flashy fast response catchments where they're underwater within 30 minutes of the rain falling. One of Flood AI's pilot catchments, Acomb, highlights this issue, where for a flood event in May of last year, the traditional flood warning was issued after the properties were already underwater. For this reason, Flood AI is exploring new techniques, including artificial intelligence and machine learning, to increase the lead time that we can provide. Our initial research evidences some of the benefits of AI/ML techniques in this space, including runtimes that are measured in minutes rather than the hours or days that traditional models can take, as well as their ability to take advantage of new remote sensing data sets, such as rainfall radar and nowcasting solutions for improved short-term forecasting. For these reasons, AI/ML techniques have significant potential to provide enhanced flood warning solutions and enable flood resilience in real time. Next slide, please. However, through Flood AI's research, AI/ML can't get there alone. We've highlighted the need for increased warning lead times. In our fast response catchments, this means issuing the warning prior to the rain having fallen. This introduces considerable uncertainty from rainfall forecasting, which is something we need to bring into the conversation if we're going to enable resilience in these rural fast response catchments. How best to communicate this with communities is still something we're exploring and will be tested during our pilot phase starting in the new year. Flood AI has also highlighted that in these rural locations, the communities themselves are integral to building flood resilience. In a city, there's often authorities setting out demand pools and coordinating the response, but in rural locations, they're not often prioritized in quite the same way. For this reason, it's essential that the communities themselves are given the right information at the right time to inform their own response and enable them to become truly resilient to flooding in themselves. Thanks, everyone. I'll hand back to Serena.
Thank you very much, Kat and Nick. We'll now move on to our panel discussion. We have got some pre-prepared questions just so that we can get through everyone, but if you've got time at the end, we'll come to you and anyone else. I would now like to welcome to the stage Rob, Mark, Louise, and Benedict, as well as Nick Watson, who will be here virtually. Okay, sorry. Oh, do we have a microphone? Thank you so much. So, thank you very much, everyone. We've now got 20 minutes, and I'll give you roughly about less than 5 minutes to respond. I'll first go to Mark, and we mentioned before how we have a little, how the work in Peru is being replicated in other places. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so there's now this idea of a model of a government-to-government response is being explored significantly in the Dominican Republic, in Central America, and also in Peru. So I think there's four or five significant G2Gs. G2G is generally over about £1 billion in value and upwards. There's also one at the moment being discussed with the British government for Kazakhstan, that I understand, and there's also one out in the Philippines. So as a model, it could be quite attractive if we're trying to get the most out of supply chains, where generally we've got a huge demand for resources, and it might be one way in which we don't waste our time just going through sort of procuring small elements. We procure blocks and numbers of companies who have established relationships working together. So that's sort of, so watch that space, because I think it's opportunity for lots of people. Not just British, there's a Dutch consortia, French consortia, Japanese, and so on, Danish, and so on. So yeah, just so it might be useful for everyone to be a bit aware of that as a model.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, I'm fine, but I'll hand it around. I've got a question for Benedict and the work with the EBRD. And you have lots of different cities in your programme, but how do you tailor these different flood management initiatives and the management strategies and the financing to these different urban contexts?
So I'll unpick that question a little bit. There's the question around tailoring the flooding piece, and also the question about tailoring the finance piece. Now, on the flooding side, we don't have sort of a predefined way of the way that EBRD does flood management, but we do have an infrastructure sector strategy, the acronym ISS, but that's not our space program. But what it includes is water, and it also includes sort of a push to explore more nature-based solutions in the projects that we do. And then when it comes to tailoring, well, we have to cover all of the municipal sectors, but we have our Green City Action Plan methodology, which of course also covers resilience, and that's sort of a one-year process with our city stakeholders, with our consultants, with ourselves. And the process is built to sort of incorporate as much as possible any existing strategies and plans that the city has. So it's less about coming up sort of with a completely new way of doing things, but integrating all of those things. So that's our way of tailoring the flooding piece. On the financing piece, the cities we work in, our principle for the financing is localization. So yes, we do also lend to the sovereign at the national level, but we can also do lending directly to the city, to city-owned companies, or even to private companies. And then we have sort of a range of different products that we can offer to the city. The example we had up earlier, in the case of Chisinau, we lent directly to the city and had a blended finance piece, because we sort of, in this case, if you're part of the program, then we can help you access climate finance, because we have that facility with the GCF, so we could bring in concessionalities, which was able to sort of tailor it to the needs of the city, which ended up sort of us being able to finance a sort of a blended blue, green, grey solution.
Great, thank you very much. You can keep it. But I will ask Louise now a question. Thank you very much, Ben. That was really helpful to get a better picture of how that might be done. And I think when we go on to looking at the 7, and it's between 2 different countries, really, with Wales and England, 2 very different very different jurisdictions in some ways. How can we deliver flood resilience across such a diverse landscape and jurisdiction?
Thanks, Serena. Tricky question. Probably you've got the urban, rural, you've got relatively diverse topology in that in the kind of Severn catchment, you've got parts of the catchment where the urban is at the bottom of the catchment, but then in the Warwickshire Avon it flips around and the urban is the bottom of Birmingham, kind of at the top of the catchment. So it's relatively challenging. I think the things that we found are kind of working at that sub-catchment scale. So we've essentially taken the Severn Basin and kind of looked at it in terms of kind of the upper Severn, the Warwickshire Avon, the middle Severn and lower Severn. So working at that scale and kind of looking at how the outlet points affect each other has been a kind of, in some respects, quite a good way to do it. The other thing we found, the River Severn Partnership, just I can't underscore how important having that set up at the start of the project was, and having kind of proper governance around it as well. So they have both a kind of a board, the River Severn board, but they also have working groups underneath it as well. And that had both the EA and NRW on it. It had Severn Trent and Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water on it, the water companies across the catchment. It had the NFU as well as local authorities and Homes England on it, and it had a range of environmental NGOs as well. So you could really, when we're doing these workshops, which were very kind of tactile workshops, literally using these kind of adaptation actions cards and thinking about, where are the opportunities in the catchment to place these actions and what sequence makes sense. You were really kind of properly collaborating across and representing the different views of stakeholders, whether it's, the need for housing in a rural location, the needs of the environment, the needs of agriculture, recognizing that nature-based solutions, we often talk about this being the kind of, the panacea of all our water woes, but they do take land and they do take a shift in culture for an agricultural community. And so, it is important to recognise the views of kind of all the stakeholders in the room. The final thing was just to think about a really wide range of solutions and benefits. So although I showed the kind of simplified pathways diagram, I would say it is the simplified one that I showed today, because if I put the complex one up, we'd still be here talking about it. But it really took a range of solutions. So we have kind of the nature-based solutions, the NF, the natural flood management, the in-channel measures, the land management, floodplain reconnection. But there are also elements and parts of the catchment where we will need to explore putting in flood defences. There are parts of the catchment where we will need to potentially see behavioural changes in kind of where we live and work, and how we respond with flood warning systems and things like that. So I think it's really taking that kind of integrated approach, and I think what's crucial about the adaptive pathways work is kind of making these plans now so that there's enough lead time to plan for these integrated approaches at scale, but whilst having that flexibility to kind of only need to kind of pull the lever for a particular solution in a particular location when you need it.
Thank you very much, Louise. Well, no, this was similar to what Benedict was saying about seeding the ideas early, making sure you get the buy-in early so that you have people along for the journey with you. So, I guess that's exactly what Rose was also doing with her visioning and making sure that everyone's along for the journey. So, Rose, one question I have for you is, now that you've done the visioning and you mentioned that this is being now taken to policy, how is it being translated to policy and practice to build national resilience? Sorry, is that? She might have gone.
Could I suggest we maybe take this question?
Yes, in the intervening? We can. Hi. Oh no, sorry. I think I need to because it's otherwise it's not going to go online. Thank you.
Hello, Cloud. My question is to you, Louise. So stakeholder engagement is, of course, an important part, and the collaboration is key. There's a chicken and egg into that. Where do you start and how do you engage people? And I'm not sure I'm going to get a very, very straight answer, but you probably have more experience than most, and I think it's an extremely important topic to address. So can you share a little bit of your experience in respect to how you go around getting stakeholders together and engaging them?
It's a very good question. If I start with maybe some of the lessons learned from, so we definitely learned lessons through the process. The first thing is the importance of having a really good, strong local convener, and a massive shout out to kind of individuals within the EA, Mark Ledith, and an individual within Shropshire Council who's head of partnerships, Hayley Dayton, who really kind of engaged bilaterally with each of the organisations to get them on board to be part of the River Severn partnership, and really kind of made that case that flooding needed to be seen, and water really crucially needed to be seen as part of the vibrant and prosperous catchment of the Severn. So I think, having that vision and kind of engaging individually with organisations to get them to the table was really key. I think the second thing is then ensuring that engagement is really tailored to the level that you're working with. So in some of our initial workshops working on the kind of adaptive pathways work, they were quite discussive, and actually in some respects we were kind of slightly going around in loops, and then we kind of took a stock take and we changed our approach. So we went for kind of very active, very participatory workshops where we kind of printed out massive pieces of paper with activities on them. We brought in an independent facilitator that wasn't an engineer, wasn't from the local community, was just a kind of facilitator for those workshops. And so that was really beneficial in kind of beginning to move things forward. And then I think it was really trying to find some champion stakeholders. So I mentioned that as part of the workshops, we were quite keen to have a reason for people to come, a kind of, why should you give up your time to come to the workshop? What's that reason? And so we made it a learning part of the workshop. So we set aside about an hour and a half in every workshop for someone to share good practice in adaptation. So we had, for example, Warwickshire Council come and present their approach to their local adaptation plan, and so we Severn Trent did the same. So we had a few kind of champion stakeholders who came along to kind of present and share what they were doing in adaptation.
Thank you very much. Good question. Thinking about engagement, but engaging more with the communities and the work that has been done with Flood AI. Nick, we've got Rose back. Rose, hi Rose. Nick, pause for a sec. I'll be back with Rose. Rose, just a quick one on how the work that you have done on the visioning has been translated to policy, or how it's being translated into policy and practice at a national scale.
Yeah, thanks, Serena. So some of our recommendations formed a series of recommendations that NICU have put forwards to Welsh Government. In developing these, NICU were really keen for us to think outside the box and identify transformational actions. So through our work, we identified a number of areas which NICU actually took forwards and then presented to Welsh Government as a way to enable resilience and adaptation at a national level. One of these was around establishing a new water commissioner who would provide national coordination and leadership around water with sufficient powers to implement recommendations. And this recognised the need for government to take a role in leading and actually coordinating the response to enable adaptation. We also recommended establishing mechanisms to incorporate nature as a stakeholder, establishing a multi-agency water resilience forum for Wales that would then work alongside community groups to support local areas to manage both flood events but respond to those and develop long-term resilience, and also recommended piloting catchment partnerships that include local voices to ensure holistic decision making. These, amongst others, were then presented to Welsh Government, and Welsh Government have responded to each of these, and they're considering how and where they can take these forwards. So the hope is that over the next years or two, Welsh Government will start to pilot and test some of these approaches, particularly around that catchment partnerships piece. I know they're really looking into areas across Wales that could actually test and pilot that approach before it could be rolled out more nationally.
Amazing. It's great to, like, strategies, we often think that when do they get implemented, but taking it to policy is something that we don't too often see. Nick, my question to you and on Flood AI was there's so much information that we can get from AI, and how do we balance that with the risk that the communities get fatigued, or the people that we're engaging with get fatigued with the amount of information? Is this something that it sounds like this is something your pilot's exploring a little bit more later?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really key that we are getting the communities involved from a point of view of helping us design a service that will be of most use to them, as well as making sure that they are, likely to take up the service when it gets rolled out. So yeah, there has been a lot of communication with them, and we are keen to avoid overly fatiguing them, as you say. So what's been really useful for us is understanding the communities that we're working in and targeting the messages specifically to them. Because we are working in quite small communities that have had a history of flooding, the engagement is quite high. But even still, we have within the community people that are really hungry for information, and we can't communicate with them enough, which is one problem. And then others who are probably at the more, working age demographic, who have less time, who are keener on, or they have less time to offer us. So it's really understanding the demographics and communicating in different ways, different times. We've communicated through letters, as well as hosting in-person events. And the times of them, we've varied from evenings, workday, weekends, all sorts of things to try and make sure we're capturing them. It's been, a mixed bag of success. We are working in rural, quite disparate communities, so the travel times between them are quite large, so it's often difficult to get everybody together at the same time and place. But yeah, the other things that have brought us bits of success are giving people actions and giving them some ownership of what we're doing. It really helps drive that engagement. And yeah, it's a bit like Louise was saying, making sure that there's some opportunity for them to learn as well. And also we've tried bribing them with food as well, which has always brought a few more in. So yeah, they're my top tips.
No, that's, it seems like it's going very well. And we have got Rob, who is a scientist and a communicator. So do you have any thoughts on how we could be communicating risk a little bit better? Sorry.
Risk is always difficult. I think what I would reflect on, that we've heard Nick say it, we've heard Mark say it about the authoritative voice is really important when it's decisions as important as this. This isn't a great time to have a plethora of different things going ping on your phone. You need to know if someone says something that they really mean it. And I think the Flood AI project is really working in the right direction with that. But also telling people what they need to know. I might understand a percentage or a probability, but actually to the person who needs to do something, they don't need to know whether it's 64%. They don't need to know if it's 0.4. They need to know whether to move their car. And actually just really putting yourself in those shoes is really important. But I think the thing that I would really like to reflect on is this whole area of flooding and climate danger, I suppose, to people. And we did some research a short while ago, which was around a range of different things that how people interact with the environment. And a really key message that came out from that was that with things like flooding, with things like climate change, ultimately it is big and scary to people living on the ground. And coming out with messages of what you can do is fine, but also you've got to come out with messages of what you are also doing to help them. Because they are looking for help, they are looking for hope, They are looking for some sort of comfort. So when you're messaging about risk, you need to consider the fact that putting all of the action on the individual is unlikely to get the response you need. You need to give them that wraparound and that support and that hope. Stories of where it works are really powerful. And I think this afternoon, we've heard of some of these projects, things that would be utterly inconceivable in some other times and places are happening. This can work, this can happen, and I think we're in a great position to share that sort of story of hope.
Thank you. I think we have time for another quick question from the floor, if there are any. Anyone got a question? No. Yeah? Thank you. No, don't worry. Oh.
Yeah, I'm from a community who are not highly literate. And of course, warning can take different things, but I believe you are working also for some countries in the global south. So how best I can inform an illiterate person to be able to know the danger of floods.
I think that's a really good point to make, and I'd say that in Peru, it's not about literacy. It's going to be acoustic warnings. Will be for the very urgent events, and that's why we have things like avalanche warnings. When you have very short duration things, people can't rely on other methods. You can also have flashing lights. So you also can have a series of cascaded community warnings that are passed around the community, where one person receives the warning, and it can be vocal, it can be a shared message, if you like, that doesn't have to be written down, but it's something that's passed. Now, that works in communities, particularly where you have vulnerable elderly or children or people who may have some form of disability, where they might need help. And I think the power of something that's like a community-based system is that you start to build relationships and understand where the vulnerabilities are within the community. But I must say, it's an excellent question, just the sort of question that from coming to Stockholm that we want to, we want to come to ensure that everything's inclusive, because we've talked a lot about global south or global central, if you like. Okay.
Thank you very much. That's a good answer. I think we're short, but we'll come to you at the end. I'm going to quickly close that, but thank you very much to all our panelists and speakers, incredibly knowledgeable. And we have seen and learned from an international to a local scale how resilience and adaptation is achieved with support from partnerships, innovation, engagement, and communication. So I do think we should all, there are so many things that we can learn from our projects, programs, portfolios, whatever we manage and involve ourselves in. So is there anything today that we can take away and bring to our own projects? As we each have an active role in shaping we each have an active role as individuals to shape a more resilient future. So thank you very much, everyone, and thanks again to our speakers.
Where did that come from?
Online people, can you pop your cameras on and you'll be on screen in the room?